like our present government. All right. England was made up of political religious parties consisting of Roman Catholicism, Episcopal, and Puritans, who were the strongest. However, the Maxon clan were Seventh-day Baptists. Their Sabbath was on Saturday. The king had bad advisors. And his first advisor, he hated the Puritans, and he urged them to rule like a king. Thus, the first 3 years of his reign, he had managed so bad that every branch of the kingdom, the House of Lords and the House of Commons, stood before him in total hostility. Then he had a struggle in 1625 with the Parliament, 1626, 1627, and I don't want to go into length of history, but he wanted to go to war, and finally he did. He went to war. He went to war against the Spaniards, and he sent 1,500 men to Spain. And what happened? They got into the wine cellars in Spain, and they were all got leathered out. They were all drunk in the morning, and he slaughtered every 1,500 of them, cut their ears off, and sent the ears back to Charles I. In order to recover the loss in popularity, Charles, he sent them there. So he got so mad, he still wanted to conquer them. So what did he do? It was called a ship money in 1634. He needed large sums of money, just like we do if we want to go back. Charles needed to make a regular supply. Also in 1634, a renegade lawyer, Attorney Roy, who was the Attorney General, discovered a method by bringing in the necessary funds. It was a famous plan of ship money, which was actually an old tax dated far back to the Danish invasion, when the object to it. First, it was a war tax. At present, and the county was at peace. Second, it was imposed on the inland counties and villages, which had never before had a call upon to pay, because the primary is a coastal tax on towns and villages which had ships, which was all along here. Everybody that had ships here was the only one that paid the taxes. Now, this new king was going inland, and in there is where the Maxon family were, 20 miles inland in that little village called Alfred. Third, the money was going to apply to supply a standing army, and not to fitting it out to feed it. The tax was imposed of mere pleasure for the king, without consent of the Parliament being asked. And this was the last straw. No Parliament, no subsidies. The Maxons were from a small inland village, Alfred County, in Lincolnshire, located in eastern England, 20 miles from the coast, and therefore refused to pay the ship tax levied upon them, and they were also conformed about the religion. They didn't want to conform to that particular religion over there because they were Seventh-day Baptists, so forced upon them by the Church of England. Therefore, in order to avoid imprisonment, they opt to pack up their belongings and set sail for the New World. And that's when they arrived in 1634 in September. These two people here. They were so successful, the families, the first three generations were nothing but ministers in the Seventh-day Baptist Church. This generation here, and this generation here. And all here, the first one, this one here, and they bought this land. They pooled their money and they bought, where is it here? It's right here. They bought 2,300 acres there, and they formed the Seventh-day Baptist Church. Why? Because Massachusetts, being Roman Catholic, had no use for them. So what happened is that Roger Williams, he went there and he set up Rhode Island. The Maxon family left there and they traveled all the way down into Trog's Neck, which is around the end of Long Island. Now, all up and down the Hudson River were the Dutch, and they were settlers. And you had the Roosevelts there, the Vanderbilts, but all through here were Indians. All these, you had the Manhattans, Mohawks, the Narragansetts, Nitanians, and you had like every organization, you had the Pequakes, which was the most powerful and dangerous. They were terrible. And I want to read what happened to them. Richard Maxson, born in England, probably of Norse descent, and the name originally was Maggson, M-A-G-G-S-O-N. Why? Because in Scotland, they never went by the man's name. They went by the maternal name. And her name was Margaret, so the nickname was Maggie. So that's what they called it, Maggson, M-A-G-G-S-O-N. Now, Puerto Rico is the same way. I have a personal friend. His name is Rafael B. Acosta-Miranda. Miranda is his mother's name. And it's easy for them to trace a lot of their family history back. He and his wife, Rebecca, came to Boston with their 10-year-old son and their daughter, Rebecca. And they joined the Baptist church there. Maxson went on to work as a blacksmith, sometimes working for Avery. The next year, he was exiled along with Roger Williams and other Baptists. Instead of going to Providence, Rhode Island, with Roger Williams, they opted to go all the way down here along Lying on the Sound because the Dutch offered them a spot down here. So 35 families went there and settled in that particular place. Now what happened is in 1637, this Pequot group, they were so bad, there was over 1,500 people there. And all the Indians around there hated their guts. All of them, they hated them because they were so terrible. And what happened? Got to read it. In 1600, the inhabitants of West Mystic, this was Mystic, Connecticut. This is where they were. In that area, the Pequoican is a fierce warlike tribe that was feared by all the surrounding tribes. Indeed, the very name means destroyers. The territory is dominated by the fortress on the fourth hill of the Groton and the Groton Hills in the city, the Pequot and Mystic. So here's what happened. In 1631, the chief, he visited Plymouth and Boston to describe to them the beautiful Connecticut Valley in around here. He wanted to settle there and protect his people from the Pequots. During the next few years, there were several clashes between the settlers and this Pequot Indians. Loss of lives on both sides. The English wanted to settle in that area, but could not because of the Pequots. Therefore, the English decided that they would have to destroy them. So on May the 24th, 1637, Captain John Mason, and in honor, there's a Mason Island down here. He and his men marched into the Narragansett territory in Rhode Island toward the Pequot Fort in Mystic, Connecticut, reaching Potter's Rock in the evening of the 24th. The next morning, the historic massacre on the high hill overlooking Mystic, Connecticut took place. At that fort burned the Indians who had escaped to in the woods. There was over 1,500. They burned the Indians and had them escape. And they massacred the whole group. But the interesting thing is that John Mason, on the 26th, 1937, in a pre-dawn attack with the Army of Colonies and with the Mohegans, the Narragansetts, and the Nitanic Indians were his allies. And that's how they got their revenge. Now, so what happened? The remaining Pequots, what they did, they scattered around there, and some of them scattered right back in here and settled in around here where the Maxon clan was. They began trading with the Indians and probably with the Dutch on Manhattan. After the Bequois were defeated in Manhattan in 1634, some found their way back to that area. Things had gone wrong enough with the Maxon group in the first year or so, good along, but one day the Indians came in. Upon being asked why not, have they replied, they were said they were afraid of the dogs. That night, the dogs were chained up, and the Indians attacked that night, burning the houses, killing some of the people, and the rest managed to escape on a shallop anchored offshore. A shallop is a small ship which was anchored right here. The next morning, a few men, including 14-year-old son Richard Maxon Jr. and his father Richard Sr., went ashore and salvaged some of the tours they could not, and they get vegetables in from the gardens. The Indians sprung out, ambushed, and killed Richard Sr. and Richard Jr. And his pregnant wife, Rebecca, sailed off and settled here in Occonock Island, which is now called Rhode Island. And that brings me to this, which goes all the way up here, this green side. You probably can't see it up there, but this is a copy of that. And there's a green spot and a red spot. Why a green spot? Green, of course, means go, red means stop. She was in the family way, and she had this son, and so you can see this portion here is this section right in here. And this is Richard. He was 13 years old when he was killed by the Indians, he and his father, Trogneck. And there's a marker now under the bridge right here that goes from Trog's Neck into Long Island. And it has the Maxon Point. So John Maxon, he was born now in the March of 27, 1638, being the first white child born in the island of Occonock, now the state of Rhode Island. John was listed in the first roll of Freemasons in Westerly, Rhode Island. He had ordained to the place of minister and pastor. And he was there until he died in 1702 at 82 years of age. His wife, this is a monument here. They were buried down along the Pocketuck River, all those first ministers. His wife was a married Mosier's, and they raised enough money to build them and build that monument there. No. So what happened? They raised enough money here that they moved from Occonock over into Westerly, and they built the first Seventh-day Baptist Church in Westerly and Hopkinton. Now, what happened next? The next great-grandfather was Captain Matthew, which is up in here. He was a captain in the Rhode Island militia during the Revolutionary War, and he had 7 of his brothers and 3 of his sons. And you got it in here. One of his brothers had this gentleman here. But Captain Matthew, he was born in 1727. He died in 1798, 64 years of age. He was a Revolutionary soldier, and he was laid to rest in the Hopkinton Cemetery in Ashway, Rhode Island. And he's listed in the DAR Index, volume number 1. He was a signer of the Test Act, but his first wife, which was Lucy Wilbert, passed away. And my history would have ended right there. But back there, they had to survive. So they got his second wife, he married the following year. He married Martha Potter. Well, anyway, one of Captain's brothers, his son, grandson, and great-grandson was this gentleman here, Ellery Maxon. And he opened up the Maxon and Fish shipyards in Mystic, Connecticut. And he was very famous. He built over 300 tall ships. And here's a picture here showing me we visit there, pointing it out where it was. But during the Civil War, the United States Navy wanted an ironclad. So they would put the bids out. And he got the first bid. He made the first ironclad, and it was sent down to the James River. And two of his famed ships were the Seminole, which is this one, and the Dallas. The Seminole, the Union Railroad out in San Francisco wanted a steam locomotive. So what they did, they put it in Boston, they went all the way down the United States, around Magellan Straits, up the West Coast, and delivered the locomotive on this particular ship. Now, we come. Why did they end in Pennsylvania? My great uncle, one of his sons, which happened to have 4 of them, was Nathan Maxton Sr., and he was a Revolutionary soldier. He traded his Mustang Alpay for 10 acres of land right here in Hartford Township. So he left this area. They traveled all the way here, up the Hudson River to the Mohawk River, over the Mohawk River to the headwaters of Susquehanna, and came down, and where you see Great Neck, Pennsylvania, they got off and walked through the woods and claimed his land there, the 10 acres. Now, this whole area was landlocked. This is where they spent a lot of their life. He, being a Revolutionary War, his plaque, he's buried in the cemetery, Dale, right there in that you're familiar with. And his plaque is listed in the courthouse square in Montrose. And he's buried in that, in the document there, and you can see it. I got the document that the War Department gave him. And they stayed there until he passed away in 1634. But during that time, he became postmaster in Gibson, Pennsylvania. He was on the tax records in 1816, 1817. He left Lenox Township and settled on the Milford-Wego Turnpike. These people didn't go anywhere until the state of New York, or state of New Jersey, gave the state of Pennsylvania $26,000 to start a road from Milford on the Delaware all the way to Owego, New York on the Susquehanna. But it had to be left to 100 miles. And if it were guaranteed, they would get the stagecoach right and the mail rights to going there. Well, in 1821, the road finally came in around Lenox Township and into Acre Lake, where my cottage was and where he stayed, and that's when they built the homestead. And then from there on, they built it up in here until it ended up in 1862. And it was exactly 43 markers. Like I said, originally when I started, Joe Breyer, he always told us, we got to prove everything. You just don't take things and go on the internet and stuff. So we had to prove it. So we drove all the way up there right on the border, there's the marker, 43 marker, and there's a big sign there showing it, telling about a historical marker, about the history of the Milford-Owego Turnpike. They had, got to read this story here. Nathan, they had seven children. Nathan Jr., he settled right on the turnpike. His residence was right in about here.
And I wonder if you can have some questions from the audience before we get.
In a minute. I want to get to the Welsh before they attack me, all right? Okay. I know we're getting... Okay. All right. Nathan Jr., he was born in 1785 in Hopkinton, Rhode Island. He came with his parents to Susquehanna County. Young man, he followed the occupation of farmer throughout his career. He died on July 8, 1844, at the age of 59 years. A shocking accident. And the creator of the Susquehanna County gave me this. It says, at the raising of a barn in Lennox Township on the 8th of this day, finishing and raising a young man by the name of N. Baker, while standing up on the end of a parlon through the Commodore, and a Commodore was a great big wood that they knocked the pillars together with, slipped out of his hand and struck Nathan Maxon, fractured his skull, and he fell senseless to the ground. A surgeon was immediately installed and called, but all human rights have been vain. He survived 26 hours and remained senseless and almost motionless, expired with a groan. He left a wife and 5 children, none of them small, all being 59 years old. He mourned was his loss. Mr. Maxon was much esteemed throughout the whole circle with his austerity. His faith was deeply applauded. The accident was not affected by intoxication. And that I got there. Now, so he left a wife and all these children. Which is this. This is him. He died. He left all these children, but they were grown up. Some of them turned out to be pretty good. The first one was Asa Maxon. He was an attorney. He got his, in 1841, he was accepted to the bar up there. But during the Milford-Wega Turnpike, he left that area and he settled and opened offices here in Milford. But with that, the Mexican War broke out. So he joined Zach Taylor with the Texas Rangers when they captured Madam Morris. He was admitted to the bar in Montrose in April 1842 under the Honorable William Jeppard. The next guy was Sterling B., and that's the one I bought my property as part of that. And he was right there at Acre Lake. And he was retired. He manufactured vinegar and hard cider, and the vineyards were still illustrated on the 1872 Beers Atlas map. Then the other 2 girls. Then we got to the doctor. Again, Joe says prove it. So we found this whole record in the Commemorative Biological Records. He was a dentist. He opened in Milford, then he moved to Halstead, and then he got married. He married a lady by the name of Sarah Adley Peck up there, and there's a red dot after her name. Why? She died in childbirth at the age of 21 years old. He remained a doctor, and he remained a widower for 18 years. Finally, in 1842, at the age of 45 years old, he married my great-grandmother, which was only 20 years old. She saw the una bate. But anyway, they had 2 children. My grandfather, which is Edra Maxon, and Ralph. And he spent his life in a 24-acre farm up at Acre Lake. And we used to, during the summer months, I played football at West Granton High School. Joe Caterino was telling you about the flagstone. We worked his flagstone quarry at Acre Lake during the summer months. Talk about slaves. He made slaves out of us. He sat there with a big pipe pointing to different things that we had to do the work. So with that, that brings me to my mother and my father. My father began his career as a commercial artist after completing a correspondence course, started a show card business in Scranton, Pennsylvania, with the large department stores in downtown Scranton, hand drawing the show cards for the window dressings, and painted all the logos on the Lion Brewery trucks and taverns with the gold leaf. He took the job designing caskets in the interior of the Miller Casket Company, and he had a substitute during the World War I by taking box up there. And I want to read that story there. First of all, like I told you, this is a picture of my great-grandmother. She was 20 years old when she married my grandfather. And her maiden name was Harding. Warren Harding, the president, was her 29th uncle, related. And it was interesting. That's how I got my name. My mother's sister, their church had a bus trip there, and they met him. And when my mother was in the family way when I was born, she insisted my mother would call me Warren. So I'm named after Warren G. Harding, which is interesting. And on this day, in May 19, 1921, Congress passed and President Warren G. Harding signed the Emergency Quota Act, which established national quotas for immigrants. Now here we are fighting about the southern border of Mexico, 1921. You don't even hear them bring it up. If they activate this, these guys would never get across the border. But that brings up another story with our present condition. Joe, I want to show you. Here's the quarry that we worked in. And here's the flagstone that we mined. And this was my father when he was a young man. Now, you want to hear the Welch story, because from there on down is actually from here. That'll bring the other book out, which is the Morgan family. Somebody talked about the dragon. There's the dragon, the double dragons. Here's the Morgan family from over here. From Maesteg in Dallas. My grandfather, my grandmother, and they didn't even know each other until they arrived in America. And they didn't know each other until they went to a church in Hazleton. And that's where they first met. The Morgan family, which is this guy right here, my great-grandfather. His name was Thomas John Morgan. His wife was Hannah Thomas. They were immigrated from Maesteg, Glamorganshire in South Wales, and arrived in 1883 through the port of Philadelphia, and they settled in the southern coalfields in McAdoo, Scottsbluff County. And they settled in the Welch patch called Patagonia. From there they migrated to the following coal towns of Audenry and in Wilkes-Barre. And there he is there. He was a miner over there, and he made enough money when he came here. He opened up a tavern in McAdoo. And this is a picture of the tavern I found in the archives. And he was also the first Bartels distributor. And here's a Bartels distributor with the horse and wagon at their tavern back there. I'm skipping ahead here because I wanted to talk about my grandmother. First of all, my grandfather now, William T. Morgan. He was a self-employed mining contractor for two coal companies. One of his mines was located in Greenwood, Pennsylvania, and the other was Mine 110 in Duryea. He was also a partner with Art Switzer in a gold mine in Arizona. After a few years, the mine went defunct. He also owned two racehorses and had them stabled in Louisville, Kentucky. Between both adventures, the family lost their fortune. He married my grandmother, which was Susanna Collins. It was interesting now. Her mother, I told her back here, over in here now. My grandmother's father got killed over there, and he's buried up in here. And this is where my wife and I, when we found the grave site, and the stone was so weathered, we bought a new stone and had it buried there in his honor. And we stayed up here in Rumney Bridge, and this is the hotel we stayed in. It's called Foulon Glace. Foulon in Welsh means spring. Glace means blue. But it's like the Spanish. They reversed the adjective and the noun. Instead of saying Blue Spring, they say Spring Blue. Just like they would say St. David. We say St. David, they say Dewey Sant. In Welsh, Dewey is David and Sant as well. So they say David Saint. Now, my great-grandmother, which is Sophia Collins, being a widow with 6 children, she left there. And of course, back at those days, there was no health or no nothing, so she had to scrub floors for the straw bosses back here in Wales that owned enough passages to come to America. So she came to America with 6 children. However, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, one of her oldest daughters died, and she had to bury her at sea. You can imagine the frame of mind that she was in, be a widow for all these years, with 6 kids, and then lose one at sea. But when they land in Philadelphia, back then you relied on the church. So the church has had a place set for them for a home and a job for her. So they picked the family up in Philadelphia, took them to Ottery, and set them up in business. And it was in there that my grandfather met my grandmother, and that's when they got married, and they moved to Wilkes-Barre, where my mother was born. And they had 7 children. The first 3 was Thomas John, Walter Morgan, and William T. Morgan Jr. And the 3 of them were in World War I. And this is the thing, this is 97 years old. This is what they used to hang in the windows when people went to war. While I was in Wales, we had a hilarious time. We visited 32 castles, and over there, we sent cards out. We sent birthday cards, Christmas cards. They sell love spoons. Now, a love spoon is originated in Wales in the 17th century, and it's believed that they were carved for young men, a token of affection given to their sweethearts. Sailors would also pass hours carving some of these designs. Although love spoons waned popularity towards the end of the 19th century, but the custom has lived on, and they are now given the present to such occasions as engagements, weddings, anniversaries, Mentors of Wales. And while I was there, I bought a love spoon. This was one that was hand carved there. With that kind of ends. But the Welsh were known for Welsh cookies, Gulmafogani, which means songfest, and poetry. So I like to close with the poetry. Vanity of vanity, all is vanity. What does a man gain from all his toil, for which he toils under the sun? Generations come and generations go, yet only the world shall endure forever. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and hastens to the westward it rose. Turning, the winds blow. All the rivers flow to the sea, but the sea is never full. The eye is not satisfied with just seeing, nor is the ear with just hearing. So what is it that stands beside man and woman throughout the toil under the sun? Only God. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, I'll be only too happy to answer them if I can. All you Welsh gals. When I was over there, I stayed like in that town there, and just south of us was Aberdare. Aberdare was a town for L.A. Lewis. What do you say, Don?
The English, there was some, I don't know if it was with Charles, where a bunch left England and went to Wales because of religious reasons. Do you know anything about that?
No. I only know our side of the family. They hightailed it out of there in 1634. They left there from London. They came to America.
Wales, and I wasn't sure if that's the same.
Yeah. Some of them scattered to get away from it. It was terrible, the taxation from that.